So we're going to be taking a deeper dive into these topics and really spending a lot more time than we have up till now, really getting our head around a particular topic. And that's why we're dividing into the 3 different streams, so that you've got the time to really learn quite a bit about it and have time to really consider that evidence as you move towards developing recommendations later in the weekend. So just to remind you all that all of the groups, the people in them have been randomly selected from among the membership of the Assembly, and you've been assigned to a theme to ensure that all of the groups that are considering these different topics are actually diverse and are representative, like the Assembly as a whole is. So although diet and lifestyle might not be the topic you would have chosen if you'd had the choice, or maybe it is, and hopefully for a lot of you it is, that actually there'll be a lot of important aspects that we really need to consider here for the future of Scotland. And so the contribution of everybody, even if you maybe go, oh, I don't know, I've got that much to say about this topic yet, the contribution of everyone will be really important. So as Ian mentioned at the end of the morning session, he obviously can't be the evidence lead in all 3 of the streams. He can't, you know, as good as he might be, he's not able to split himself into 3 different people. So what we have for our evidence lead for this strand is Professor Pete Smith from Aberdeen University. You'll recognise him as one of the speakers from last weekend as well. He's been one of the evidence group members and working very closely with everyone to put together the evidence that you're going to be hearing over the weekend. So I'd just like to invite Pete to say hello quickly.
Hello, hope you remember me, at least from the video. I'm wearing the same fleece, so I should be easily recognisable.
Okay, great. Thank you, Pete. And also we've got Josh Littlejohn, our convener, joining us for this afternoon as well. So between them, Josh and Ruth and Ian will be sort of dropping in on some of the different strands, so they can keep an idea and a flavour of what we're doing, what all of the different groups are covering. And so they'll be joining some of the groups this afternoon, so they can keep up. Josh will be joining one of the groups this afternoon, so you can keep up with the conversations you're having and following the Assembly's process. So Josh, do you want to just say hi? Because it'll be...
Yeah, hi everyone. Very much looking forward to kind of just listening in really and watching how these discussions and deliberations play out, and look forward to hearing all of your views.
Okay, thank you very much, Josh. So really, without any further ado, let's get into the topic. So I'm going to hand over to Pete now to give us a quick introduction as to what we're going to be looking at in the diet and lifestyle topic.
Can you see the screen, Kayla?
Yep.
Right, okay, good. So welcome everyone you're in the diet and lifestyle group, as Kayla mentioned, of the Climate Assembly. Over the next few weekends, you'll be focusing on what Scotland eats and what it buys. So this weekend is going to focus on what we eat, the diet in Scotland. So as I highlighted in the video that you saw in the last meeting, just under a quarter of our greenhouse gas emissions in Scotland come from agriculture and related land use. And globally, food production is responsible for 26% of all our emissions. So this weekend, we're going to be exploring in more detail where emissions come from when producing food, what emissions the production of different foods produce, and we'll also be looking at a little bit more about what is a healthy diet, both for humans, the people eating it, and for the planet. We'll then hear from a number of different perspectives on how Scotland can change what it eats to help tackle climate change. So approximately 80% of the land in Scotland is used for food production. And we'll therefore be exploring how Scotland could use this land left differently to help tackle the climate change. And we'll hear from a number of different speakers with their ideas as well. In weekend 4, you'll focus on lifestyles and how they contribute towards climate change. So as Mike Berners-Lee highlighted at the last meeting, there really is carbon in everything we buy. Greenhouse gas emissions are produced in the creation of the raw materials to make goods, during the manufacturing of the component parts, the transportation of the different components, during the final manufacturing process, and then in the transport and distribution to the warehouse, and then onto shops, businesses, and to our homes. So all these stages in the process build up the carbon footprint. So there are further emissions produced when a product is disposed of. So when we send it to landfill or when it's recycled, for example. So you'll therefore be considering how Scotland can change how it uses goods. Should we be able to repair things more easily, for example? Or should we share products rather than buying them and owning them? Instead of throwing things away, could we reuse them? To explore all of these issues for diet and lifestyle, we'd be considering the following 4 questions. How should Scotland rebalance its diet to tackle the climate emergency in an effective and fair way? How should Scotland change how it uses its land to tackle the climate emergency in an effective and fair way? How should Scotland manage its materials and resources to tackle the climate emergency in an effective and fair way? And finally, how should Scotland change how it buys things to tackle the climate emergency in a fair and effective way? So I'll hand back over now to Kayla.
Thanks, Pete. So we're going to, as Pete said, these are the topics that we're going to be looking at, the questions we're going to try and answer over the course of the next couple of weekends. So really, before we start looking at that, we're going to send you back into your breakout groups, just as a bit of a reminder, because you might remember at the end of weekend 2, we heard a bit about all of the different topics, all of the 6 different topics that the different streams are going to be looking at. We heard a bit about them, and you worked in your groups to develop up some priorities. And from those priorities, at the very end of the meeting, people were able to sort of vote and highlight what were their top 3. And that was kind of the rest of the assembly giving us, as the group who are looking at diet and lifestyle, a bit of a task to focus on to start with. So I'm going to put you back in your breakout groups, and you'll have a chance to remind yourselves of what those priorities were. So if we're ready to open the breakout groups, I'll see you in about 10 minutes' time. Okay, so a couple of rooms will take you a little while to come back. Hopefully that was a bit of a reminder of some of the things that you spoke about and prioritized the last time that you were all together. So that looks to me now like all of our group is back. So yeah, as I said, hopefully that was a bit of a reminder there of, you know, some of the things you spoke about and some of the priorities that the group, that the assembly as a whole identified when thinking about diet and lifestyle there. So what we're going to do now is actually move into the first of the real evidence presentations. Okay, so we've got two videos that we're going to show you. They're, remember what we were talking about, the different types of evidence? So this is actually like informant evidence. So it's about trying to set that wider context of what really are the big issues here. If we're thinking about how should Scotland rebalance its diet to tackle the climate emergency in an effective and fair way. So we're going to be getting lots of information, and this is information that's going to be relevant to you and useful to you over the rest of this weekend and next weekend. So again, I would encourage people to sort of take some notes for yourself, note down some of the key points that are going to be important to you. So hopefully you've got, you know, a pen or a tablet or a laptop or however you want to take notes or do little mind maps or drawings, whatever it works for you. But try and keep some of this information so that you'll be able to refer back to it as we go forward and start looking at, well, what are we going to do about some of these issues? So I'm going to hand over to Pete to give a little introduction to the first presentation we have.
Thanks, Kayla. Yeah, so the first presentation today is designed to provide an introduction to food and climate change, and it's by Sarah Bridle from the University of Manchester. So we can roll the video now, please.
Found them interesting there. We're going to go into the breakout groups now to have a bit of a chance to talk about what you've heard and start thinking, well, really, what are the big problems and what would we need to do if we're thinking about change? So I'm going to, and just before you go, a reminder that all of the speakers are here. Well, the speakers are here. We've got Anna and we've got Sarah. We've also got Pete. So if you do have questions, we can send one of the speakers into your room to answer any of them. We're going to put you into the rooms now for about 25 minutes. Okay, so we will see you again at just after 3 o'clock, 10 past 3. A number of different presentations, and most of the speakers are actually with us, so you'll be able to call them into your breakout rooms later as well to be able to answer any questions that you have. So these presentations are a bit different. And remember when we talked about evidence back in the first week, we spoke about there's that more informant evidence that's about sort of setting out the sort of the factual context around stuff. And then there's other evidence that is a bit more about making suggestions, you know, and advocating for different things that could be done, different ways of actually making change, rather than just identifying what sort of change needs to happen. Now, in advance of the session today, we sent you some via email and some via some in the post, a little sort of template for taking notes. So it looked a bit like a rainbow. So hopefully, this is a session that we're going to be using that. So hopefully people have it to hand. I'm going to share my screen just to remind you what we're talking about and how we're going to ask you to use it when you're taking notes during this next session. So just one sec. So I'm sharing with you here this sort of, I keep calling it a rainbow, but whether we call it arcs or whatever we call it, but basically it's setting out these different levels where action can be taken. And if we think back to some of the things Anna was talking about this morning and you were talking about in the different groups, there's lots of different places that actually we can drive change from or enable change from. So some of those changes are sort of at an individual basis, some around households, communities, neighborhoods. There's the organizations and the institutions, and then that much more sort of the public policy, the government level, where there's regulation, tax, incentives, but also more widely, society and actually the norms and the values and the things that actually underpin how a society wants to live. So I'll just move on to the next screen to show you that, for example, and I'm presenting you an example here around the idea of if we were talking about work, which we're not, there might be different types of changes or different types of activities that could take place at these different levels that would help enable the type of change that we're talking about that's going to be needed to move towards that sort of low carbon lifestyle and reach net zero. So for example, you can see under in that first inner hub, inner circle, the choices that individuals make, the types of things that an individual can actually choose to do and change their own behavior to help us move towards that change. And that the next layer up, we've got things like at a household or sort of a community level, that actually, if we were talking about work, changes that enabled people to actually work in sort of local office hubs and co-working spaces, so that it reduced the amount of both travel that people were doing if they were having to commute into the center of cities all the time, but also enable that different type of way of living and working. We could be talking, if at the next layer out, if we're talking about the changes that organizations can make, that idea of changing expectations about home working. We all know that there's been a lot of change, even with the lockdowns at the moment, that organizations that previously were, oh, it'd be impossible for people not to have to come into the office, have found different ways of working. And that would, you know, potentially reduce travel, the need for some of the bigger offices, all sorts of stuff there. Or changing the way that we deliver public services so that actually there is this online first, so people aren't having to go into offices, travel, all of these things to actually, deal with the services they need. If we're talking at a sort of policy level, the next layer out, we could be talking about things like government investing in low carbon industries, or making the commitment for the rollout of super fast broadband, which would actually enable potentially more home working and those types of changes, or tax incentives. And then finally, if we're talking in the sort of values and beliefs, the types of examples you might have is, and the way that society operates, what becomes normal, that idea of maybe moving, more people living in rural areas and working remotely, changing that whole, so that change in the way people are working changes a whole lot of other things about how they live their lives as well. The current crisis has also made people start thinking about, well, what sort of jobs do we really value? What are the most important types of jobs? That changing ways of what is important in work. And they were some of the things that came out in the stories that you were discussing earlier this morning. So what we're going to, I'll stop sharing my screen now, but what we're going to ask you to do is, as you're listening to these next presentations and thinking back over some of the things you've already heard, as well as noting down ideas that actually sound like, actually, there's something there that could really help make a difference, that seems like a positive way forward, to also be thinking, well, where maybe in these different levels does that sit? Where do we need to be when we later start thinking about making recommendations? Where do we need to be targeting that recommendation to? Is it about public awareness? Is it about education? Is it about the way our institutions operate? Or is it about the different levels of government? So hopefully that makes sense. So we're going to hear a series of presentations now, and I'm going to hand over to Pete for a moment to give us a bit of an introduction while I get the video ready.
Thanks very much, Kayla. So the first presentation of the day is going to be by Lawrence Borton. He's from the UK Health Alliance on Climate Change, and it brings together doctors, nurses and other health professionals to advocate for responses to climate change that protect and promote public health. So Lawrence will set out the recommendations for how to change Scotland's diets to tackle the climate emergency. So Kayla, you can roll the video when you're ready, please.
Okay, will do. So we're just going to give you a minute now to think back on what you've just heard, note down anything important before we move on to the next presentation.
She's from Feedback, and Feedback is a campaign group working to regenerate nature by transforming our food system. So when you're ready, Kayla, please roll the video. Okay, thanks, Kayla. The third presentation in this session will be by Martin Kennedy from the National Farmers Union of Scotland. NFU Scotland is Scotland's leading agricultural organisation which promotes and protects the interests of its members by influencing government, the supply chain and consumers in order to secure a sustainable future for Scottish agriculture. So Kayla, when you're ready, roll the video. Thanks very much, Kayla. So the fourth and final presentation in this evidence session is from Keisha Crawford-Davis from Nourish Scotland. Nourish Scotland is a charity focusing on food policy and practice. They work for a fair, healthy and sustainable food system that truly values nature and people. So Kayla, over to you when you're ready to roll.
And again, thumbs to be open now and give you some time to discuss this and start thinking about, well, where are there sort of ideas that start looking towards making fair and effective change? And just a reminder that most of the speakers are actually here with us on the call. So if there's something that's captured your imagination, you want some more information about, or want some clarity on something that was said, please do let your facilitator know and we'll get someone to you as soon as we can. And I will see you just before 4:30. We could have spent on these conversations, but we'll be picking up, at least you'll be in the same groups tomorrow and you'll be able to pick up the conversations again. So we'll just let the groups get back. Okay, we're still just waiting for a couple of the groups to come back, so just give it a second there. Okay, this looks like all of the groups are back now. And we're just saying there's lots more I'm sure you could have been discussing there. And, there's always a lot of detail in the presentations that we had there and a lot of different ideas. So just to let you know that you'll actually be in the same groups again tomorrow. So you will be able to continue your conversations. So if there are things that you've kind of felt that you didn't quite get to finish today, you will be in the same group. You'll be able to continue the conversation that you've started. Just one thing before we finish up, I'm going to ask Nadine from the research team. Oh no, not today. I'm not going to ask Nadine, but reminder, I have said to you all already that actually the research is really invaluable to us. So if you haven't signed up to be part of the research and doing the surveys, do let Juliet know and we can link you up to that very quickly. Last thing I want to say is, again, thank you for all of your work today. And I know it's been a bit longer day than normal, but hopefully, it's been worthwhile. We will start at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. You'll get the link for the new Zoom call. And just in the last 30 seconds, Pete, do you want to say just a few closing words?
No, I sat in on a couple of the breakout groups, and it's just amazing the energy that we've got in the group. We've got very late in the day, but there was still a lot of energy, and it was fantastic and a really, really high quality of debate. So thanks everyone, it's been fantastic.
Okay, enjoy the rest of your evening, and we will see you before 10. Well, try and sign on a bit before, but we'll see you at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning.